The air over southern England on the night of June 5, 1944, was thick with the scent of saltwater, diesel fumes, and a palpable, collective tension. From the declassified logs of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, SHAEF, we know that over 5,000 vessels and 11,000 aircraft were moving into position. For Martha Gellhorn, a veteran correspondent for Collier's magazine, this historic moment was a source of profound professional fury. She had reported on the grim realities of the Spanish Civil War and the freezing hell of the Winter War in Finland. Now, as the decisive chapter of this global conflict was about to be written, military bureaucracy had relegated her and all other female reporters to a press briefing in London or, at best, a sanitized tour after the beachhead was secure. The official stance was one of protection, but Gellhorn saw it for what it was, a chauvinistic barrier preventing her from doing her job. The greatest story of the war was unfolding, and she was being locked out. To understand Gellhorn's resolve, one must look at her biography, which is a study in rebellion against convention. While her then-husband, Ernest Hemingway, cultivated a macho persona and enjoyed the celebrity status that granted him a coveted seat aboard an attack transport for D-Day, Gellhorn despised what she called the view from the balcony. Archival interviews and her own letters reveal a deep-seated conviction that war could only be understood through the eyes of its victims and its lowest-ranking participants. Her dispatches from Spain focused not on tactical maneuvers but on the faces of civilians caught in the crossfire. For her, journalism was a moral act, a duty to bear witness. To be denied access to Normandy was not just a professional slight, it was a denial of her entire purpose. As the engines of the invasion fleet rumbled across the coast, she decided that if the military wouldn't give her a path to the front, she would forge one herself, no matter the consequence to her career. Hello, listener, let me know where you're watching from. And if you don't mind subscribing to the channel and giving it a like, I'd be very pleased as the author. Enjoy listening. The Allied Command's logistical plan for the press was as detailed as any bombing run. A small, elite group of male correspondents, including Hemingway and the legendary Ernie Pyle, were embedded with combat units. The strategic rationale was twofold: to control the narrative flowing back to the home front and to ensure the reporter's safety. From a tactical standpoint, a civilian on a crowded landing craft was a liability. The military equipment of the invasion, the Higgins boats, the duplex drive tanks, the specialized demolition gear, required every square inch of space and every ounce of lift. Planners argued that there was no room for non-essential personnel. This rigid structure, however, failed to account for the ingenuity of someone like Gellhorn. While the official press corps prepared their approved kits, she was already moving, armed with nothing but her press credentials, a small bag, and an audacious, unformed plan born of desperation and instinct. Gellhorn's target was not a heavily guarded troop transport but a vessel of a different kind, a hospital ship. These ships were designated under the Geneva Convention with massive red crosses, intended to stay offshore and receive the wounded. In the chaos of the Southampton docks, she located an LST, landing ship, tank that had been converted for medical use. Flashing her credentials and feigning an assignment to interview nurses, she talked her way aboard. This was a critical choice. Analysis of naval dispositions shows these ships were part of the tertiary support fleet, not the initial assault wave. Her presence was less likely to be questioned here, among medics and orderlies. The LST itself was a technological workhorse of the war, a flat-bottomed vessel designed to run aground and disgorge its contents directly onto a beach. Gellhorn had no idea that this very design feature would soon provide her with the opportunity she so desperately sought. As the ship slipped its moorings and joined the immense, shadowy flotilla moving south into the English Channel, Gellhorn found a quiet corner on the deck. The night sky was torn open by the drone of thousands of C-47 transport planes carrying the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions toward their drop zones behind enemy lines. Personal diaries of other service members on that crossing describe a surreal sense of destiny and dread. For Gellhorn, it was a night of profound uncertainty. She was a stowaway in plain sight, her bluff carrying her this far but no further. She had no official orders, no assigned bunk, and no guarantee she would get any closer to France than this offshore vantage point. All she could do was watch the coast of England disappear into the blackness, listen to the thunder of the Allied air armada above, and wait for the dawn to reveal if her gamble would pay off or end in failure. Dawn on June 6, 1944, broke not with light, but with an apocalyptic, earth-shaking sound. From her position on the hospital ship, Gellhorn witnessed the full, terrifying power of the Allied naval bombardment. The archival logs of Operation Neptune confirmed that battleships like the USS Texas and HMS Warspite were systematically hurling massive shells, some weighing as much as a small car, at the German fortifications of the Atlantic Wall. Each salvo from the fleet's big guns created a deafening roar followed by a low-frequency concussion that shuddered through the LST's hull, a physical manifestation of industrial warfare unleashed. For Gellhorn, this was the overture to the invasion, a horrifyingly beautiful and brutally impersonal display of force. But she knew the true story would not be found in the thunder of the guns, but in the silence that followed on the beaches below. The impersonal nature of the bombardment ended abruptly. Soon, the first landing craft began returning from the shore, not with victorious soldiers, but with the broken first wave of the assault. What had been a pristine hospital ship transformed into a chaotic extension of the battlefield. Medics rushed to the railings as Higgins boats, their steel ramps riddled with machine gun fire, pulled alongside. The first casualties were a testament to the ferocity of the German defense at Omaha Beach. Gellhorn saw men with limbs mangled by shrapnel from 88mm artillery, faces seared by burns, and torsos stitched by the terrifyingly fast MG-42 machine guns. Plasma drips swung wildly as orderlies scrambled to administer aid. For Gellhorn, this was the brutal arithmetic of invasion, and it solidified her resolve. The view from offshore was a lie, the truth was on that blood-soaked sand. Amidst the controlled chaos of the medical deck, Gellhorn's journalistic eye, honed by years of observing systems under stress, identified her opportunity. She watched the grimly efficient process. Wounded men were carefully unloaded from the returning landing craft, and then the same boats would take on supplies or return to the beach for more casualties, often with stretcher bearers to help retrieve the wounded from the sand. This was the critical logistical loop she could exploit. No one was checking papers on the boats heading back into the fray. The military's entire focus was on moving the wounded out and reinforcements in. Her decision was made in an instant. She would not be a reporter. She would become a stretcher bearer. It was a role that required no special uniform, only nerve and the appearance of purpose. Her transformation was swift and furtive. Slipping away from the main deck, Gellhorn found a small, unoccupied lavatory. Inside the cramped, rocking space, she made her move. According to her own accounts, she locked the door, hid her reporter's bag containing her typewriter, and pocketed only a small notebook. Her elegant clothes were no longer an asset but a liability. There was no uniform to steal, but she knew that in the heat of battle, authority came from action, not attire. Emerging back into the fray, she moved with a newfound urgency. She spotted a group of medics preparing to board an empty Higgins boat returning to shore. Without hesitation, she fell in with them, her face a mask of grim determination. When the young coxswain, barely a man, gave her a questioning look, she simply stated, "I'm a stretcher bearer." In the overwhelming noise and urgency of the moment, it was enough. The short journey from the hospital ship to the shore was a descent into hell. The water was a slurry of debris, discarded life vests, floating ration packs, and the wreckage of obliterated landing craft. The air, thick with the acrid smell of cordite, was a cacophony of screeching shells, the relentless crackle of small arms fire, and the agonizing cries of men. Gellhorn crouched low in the boat, the steel hull offering scant protection from the chaos. This was not the strategic overview of the generals or the curated story of the press corps. This was the raw, unfiltered experience of combat. As the Higgins boat ground against the gravel of the beach, the coxswain screamed, "Go!" The steel ramp slammed down onto the wet, red-stained sand of Omaha Beach. Martha Gellhorn, the stowaway, had arrived. Stepping onto Omaha Beach was like stepping into a Hieronymus Bosch painting of war. The meticulously organized plan of Operation Overlord had disintegrated into primal chaos. Gellhorn's first sensory inputs were of staggering violence. Wrecked Sherman DD tanks, designed to be amphibious, lay half-submerged in the surf, their crews likely drowned before firing a shot. Twisted steel hedgehogs and submerged Rommel's asparagus, the brutally effective German beach obstacles, were draped with the bodies of American GIs from the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions. The high water mark was a gruesome tableau of the dead and dying, a testament to the withering crossfire from German machine gun nests like WN-62, perched on the bluffs above. Gellhorn, armed only with her courage, instinctively began to follow the medics, her purpose now inseparable from theirs, to find the living among the dead. The tactical reality of Omaha Beach was a meat grinder. The initial assault waves had been decimated, and the survivors were pinned down behind a narrow strip of shingle, the only cover on the entire beach. Here, under the constant threat of mortar and sniper fire, Gellhorn went to work. Her biographer, Caroline Moorhead, confirms through Gellhorn's own letters that she abandoned all pretense of being an observer. She grabbed one end of a stretcher and helped haul a wounded soldier from the water's edge, his leg shattered by a teller mine. She helped medics apply tourniquets and pressure dressings. This deep dive into the human factor of combat set her reporting apart. She wasn't just watching, she was participating in the desperate, life-saving work, her hands stained with the same blood and grime as the men she was there to write about. This experience gave her an authority no press briefing could ever confer. Her analysis of the battlefield was visceral and immediate. She saw firsthand the failure of pre-invasion bombardment to neutralize the German defenses. The fortifications, deeply embedded in the bluffs, had withstood the naval shelling. She witnessed the terrible vulnerability of the infantrymen, who were forced to cross hundreds of yards of open, killing ground. The equipment that was supposed to clear the way, the amphibious tanks, the demolition charges, was either at the bottom of the channel or burning on the beach. What ultimately saved the beachhead was not technology or grand strategy, but human courage at the platoon level. Small groups of soldiers, led by junior officers and NCOs, began improvising, using Bangalore torpedoes to blow gaps in the wire and leading desperate, costly assaults up the bluffs. Gellhorn was a direct witness to this crucible of leadership. In the midst of the carnage, Gellhorn's reporter's mind was still at work, cataloging the small, devastating details that would make her story so powerful. She noted the expressions on the faces of the GIs, not of heroic fervor, but of numbed exhaustion and sheer terror. She saw the personal effects spilling from the pockets of the dead, letters from home, a photograph of a sweetheart, a rosary. These were not faceless casualties, they were individuals. One of her most poignant recorded observations was of helping a wounded German soldier, a young boy terrified and crying for his mother. It was a moment that transcended nationality and ideology, reducing the titanic struggle of nations to a shared, basic humanity. This ability to capture the personal within the epic would become the hallmark of her D-Day dispatch. As the afternoon wore on, the tide of battle on Omaha Beach slowly, agonizingly, began to turn. U.S. Navy destroyers, in a series of incredibly brave and tactically brilliant maneuvers, sailed dangerously close to shore to provide direct fire support, their 5-inch guns blasting German strongpoints at point-blank range. This naval intervention was a critical turning point. Gellhorn, exhausted and covered in grime, had worked for hours, helping to carry dozens of wounded men back to the landing craft for evacuation. She had seen more of the brutal reality of D-Day than almost any other journalist. With her notebook filled with scrawled, visceral observations and her mind seared with the images of the day, she finally made her way back onto one of the boats returning to the relative safety of her hospital ship, her mission on the shore complete. Returning to the hospital LST was like ascending from hell into purgatory. The ship, once a clean, white vessel, was now a floating casualty station, its decks slick with blood and salt water. The economic and logistical miracle of the American war machine was on full display, endless supplies of plasma, sulfa powder, and morphine, but it was barely enough to cope with the sheer volume of human suffering. Gellhorn found her hidden bag and, securing a small, relatively quiet space, retrieved her Hermes typewriter. While medics continued their desperate work around her, she began to write. The clatter of the keys was a stark contrast to the groans of the wounded, but for her, it was an act of equal urgency. She had a sacred duty to translate the chaos she had witnessed into words, to give a voice to the men who lay suffering and silent around her. The resulting dispatch for Collier's magazine, titled The Wounded Come Home, is a masterwork of war reporting. A close analysis of the text shows a deliberate rejection of strategic jargon and military triumphalism. Instead, she focused entirely on the human cost. She wrote not of securing objectives, but of men who walked in water and died on the beach. She described the courage of the medics, the stoicism of the wounded, and the simple, profound bravery of the men who had faced the machine guns. She wrote, everyone was violently busy on that crowded, dangerous shore. The men on the stretchers, who had been hit, were the only still people. This biographical and human-centered approach was her unique contribution. While others reported on the advance, Gellhorn reported on the price. Her triumphant return to London, however, was short-lived. The military authorities, learning of her unauthorized presence at the front, were incandescent with rage. Her press credentials were immediately revoked. SHAEF, already struggling to manage the narrative, could not tolerate such a flagrant breach of protocol. From a command perspective, her actions set a dangerous precedent. If one reporter could flout the rules, the entire carefully controlled system could collapse. Furthermore, her estranged husband, Hemingway, had filed a lackluster report from the safety of a landing craft, and Gellhorn's vivid, first-hand account was a source of immense professional and personal embarrassment to him. She was placed on a security watch list and effectively grounded, a prisoner of her own journalistic coup. Gellhorn's response to being sidelined was typical of her character. She refused to be silenced. Instead of returning to the United States in disgrace, she used her wits and a network of contacts to circumvent the authorities once again. She acquired credentials as a French correspondent, a move that allowed her to operate outside the strictures of the American military press pool. Declassified OSS files and her personal correspondence show that she soon found her way back to the front lines, covering the Battle of the Bulge and the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp. Her D-Day story had cemented her reputation. She had proven that the most important stories required not just skill, but a willingness to take immense personal and professional risks. Her defiance became an inspiration for a new generation of female journalists who would follow her into the world's most dangerous places. In the final analysis, Martha Gellhorn's D-Day stowaway mission was more than just a journalistic scoop, it was a defining moment in the history of war correspondence. By breaking the rules, she exposed their absurdity. She demonstrated that a woman could not only endure the front lines but could also report from them with a unique and powerful perspective that focused on compassion and human cost. Her tactics, guile, improvisation, and a focus on the overlooked logistical arteries of war allowed her to bypass the official narrative and capture a deeper truth. The story she brought back from Omaha Beach was not about the grand strategy of generals but about the individual courage of ordinary soldiers. It forever changed the perception of what a war correspondent, and specifically a female war correspondent, could and should be. The archives prove that on the longest day, one woman's defiance ensured that the full, terrible, and human story of the invasion would be told.